The Tennessee stud himself, all 6'9", 275, of Ron Fuller. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. Nice
Man,
to be
I'll
with
tell you
you.
what, you found the fountain of youth, man, because you look amazing.
I don't know about that.
You
but,
do. You
I feel
really
pretty
look great.
good.
You know, I mean, for a guy that's pushing what, like you're like 105 now, 106. You're looking good.
Yeah,
No,
I
we know
feel
you're
pretty
not
good.
that old. We know you're just a baby. Ron, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about your. We got a lot to talk. Oh my God, so much to talk about. Where do we begin? Talk about your wrestling career. You're managing, owning a promotion, running a promotion. Now you're an author and a podcaster. Holy! Is there anything you don't do?
Well, there's a few things I don't do, but that's
I've not
because I
seen you
don't
sing
want
and
to.
dance yet.
No, I'm not much of a dancer, that's for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what. Mikey, why don't we give Mr. Fuller the introduction that he deserves from this crew here. Let's introduce everybody to Ron. Ron, I'm Angelo. We spoke, you know that.
Right?
Gentleman here, the good-looking guy with the big old mutton chops. That is Dan the Man, the happy haberdasher. Dan the Man Sebastiano. He's the smartest guy in the room.
Hello?
And of course, got over here the man who set everything up tonight, Mike Messier.
Mike?
Hi, Ron.
Yeah, Mike is an actor, writer, producer, director, filmmaker. He just actually won. Why don't you tell Ron about the new award that you just won?
Well, what it was, Ron, is that I made a very short film with my phone, and then I had an editor do some work on it, and the piece won an award from what's called the Alternative Film Festival. It's called The Never Was, and it actually has a slight wrestling tie-in because a friend of mine at the time was working on a documentary about Justin Credible. And I've known Justin a little bit, and some of the mistakes that Justin's made that he's admitted to himself kind of inspired this piece that Never Was, which is really about someone who never achieved their full potential. And I find that a lot of people suffer through that. I think in your case, you would be the opposite of that. You and your brother, you and your brother and your cousin all exceeded tremendously in professional wrestling. But my little short piece that Never Was really kind of try to be an inspirational piece to those that haven't fulfilled their life's destiny yet, which I would put myself in that same category. So it's really an honor to have the Tennessee stud, Ron Fuller, here tonight. I've been watching a lot of his matches this past week. Very excited.
Yeah, Mike, you know.
Yeah, very excited.
I got to tell you something, right? He's driving me crazy today, Ron. He really driving me crazy today. Have you seen this one? Have you seen that one? Say, oh, all right, Mikey. I'll spend the next 12 hours watching Ron Fuller match.
That sounds like a great concept. What you're talking about there, Mike. That sounds pretty amazing, man. Congratulations.
He's a really talented guy, Ron. He really is. He really is a very talented guy. We're happy and honored to have him as part of our team.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
I think it's fair to say. Now let's go back a little bit in history here. I think it's fair to say without the Fuller Welch clan, certainly without Roy Welch. Without Roy Welch, there is no wrestling in Tennessee. In fact, I dare say there's probably no wrestling in the southern half of the United States without this legendary, iconic visionary. Before wrestling, what was there? What did Roy Welch do? How did this man make his income? How did he earn his money?
Well, you know, he grew up. He's got Indian blood. My granddad had quite a bit of Indian blood, and he lived out there in West Texas, New Mexico area, from a very poor family, and they grew up poor. Just one real quick story about my granddad to give you an idea what kind of family he had. At 12 years old, they lived in the northern plains of New Mexico, and they had a few cows. And when the winter came, they had to drive them off the plateau up there and get them down in the southern part of New Mexico to get through the winter with them. And so my granddad was 12 years old. He had a brother named Herb that was a little younger. He had another brother named Jack. And they, with no shoes on their feet and their dad on a horse, they took about a dozen cows south off the plateau. And when they got down there, my granddad told me that the day they got ready to leave, he said his dad woke him up and he said, "Look, come over here. I want to show you how to wire rabbits out of a hole." And he took some barbed wire and wrapped it down in the hole, wrapped it in the rabbit's hair, jerked him out of the hole. And he said, "I want you to stay here, son, and be back in 3 months. Follow the cows, and we'll come back and get you." And 3 months from now, 12 years old. And he left him out there in the prairie with a dozen cows. He said, "You got to follow them." He said, "You go where they are, we'll find you in 3 months." And they went back north, and they left him down there for 3 months, 12 years old. So
now I got to tell you something. I'm a little older than these guys. I heard that story previously. And when I heard it the first time, I thought, there's no way. This is like some Southern tale. They embellished it. Maybe Ron added a couple little details to it. And then I thought to myself, if he tells that story, I got to call bullshit because I thought it was all. Yeah, but you know what? I heard that, and this is the third time I've heard that story. And I got to and Ron almost verbatim. I can't believe they left this guy, this young kid, like 12, 13 years old, left him out there for 3 months. Actually, the story I heard was a little longer than 3 months.
It could have been.
About 3.5 months they left him out there.
It sounds like the backstory of a rancher-themed heel. Got abandoned by my family, and now I'm fighting back.
Yeah, well, his father was pretty much a full-blooded Indian, and he was a rustler. That's where he got his cows that they probably took south. Is he probably rustled those cows, and he came up from rough group of guys, and and then started in professional wrestling. Have you ever heard I'm sure you guys have heard of the original Dutch Mantel?
Yes, sir, I have.
The original, from West Texas out there in the Amarillo area, worked in New Mexico. He taught my grandfather to wrestle, to shoot.
Yeah.
Roy, he broke Roy's wrist the first time they ever shot on purpose. And then Roy, he said, in his Dutch accent, he said, "And I hope I never see you again." And Roy said, "Oh, no, I'll be back. I'll be back." And about 6 months later, he came back and he broke his ribs the next time. So, he really had it tough getting into the wrestling business. But he really learned a whole lot. He worked as a carny on the Valley. Back in those days, that's where a lot of wrestlers got their start. And obviously he could shoot. And he learned everything he learned from Dutch Mantel so far as a shooter. And Dutch eventually sent him to Territory, Columbus, Ohio, in the early 20s.
Ron, I want to pick up on that for just a second, because we've heard stories on the podcast before about guys working the carny circuit way back in the day, but back in the 20s and 30s especially, when they were traveling carnivals. You had the strong man, you had, of course, the wrestler, who would very often the wrestler would work another person in the carnival, but the people didn't know it. It was like kind of a shill, kind of a. So you know where I'm going with this. But once in a while, you had a guy step up that was a local townsperson, the local strong guy, or the big Bubba from the area, and he wanted to show everybody just how strong he was. They tell me that the guys who worked the carny circuit were some of the best shooters in the world because they never knew what they were going to run up against.
Yeah.
Whether it was somebody, from town that just wanted to try you on and see, what you got. Or sometimes even guys that worked with you in the carnival circuit, if they had heat with you, they like to try you on too. So can we talk a little bit about the early wrestling on the Carney circuit?
Sure, absolutely.
So tell me about like I know that Roy Welch did a lot of that. Where was his primary education in wrestling? Was it the Carneys?
No, I think he got almost all his education from Dutch Mantell.
Okay.
He told me that when he got interested in wrestling, they had some organized wrestling in Amarillo, and Dutch Mantell was actually working some shows in probably the 1910s to the 1920 era in Amarillo area, and he went to a show, and he got a chance to meet him, and he asked him. He said, "Would you train me?" And Dutch didn't want to train him, but I'll tell you a Dutch Mantell story that you probably never heard. This is pretty amazing story. This in that same time frame, Dutch got Roy involved with the Carneys because he taught him to shoot, and he said, "Your next step is to work in the carnival. You're going to shoot with marks." He said you'll learn a whole lot there, and then he said, Roy, after about 2 years. I asked him, I said, "Did you ever lose?" And he said, "No." He said, "No, I never lost." He goes, and he said, "Sometimes there'd be two of us on the valley." And he said, "I was the smallest guy. I always got picked to shoot with. If a guy wanted to shoot, he picked me." And so I said, "Well, what happened if you lost?" And he said, "Well, hell, they'd fire you, boy." And I said, "Well, oh, just like that?" And he said, "Hell yeah." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "They'd hire the son bitch that beat you.
Exactly.
You got your job, So
I heard stories like that.
So
I actually heard stories like that. Not that particular one, but I've heard those type of stories. It's very often the mark would end up working for the carnival.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. If you could beat the wrestler, I mean, why not hire the guy that could beat your man?
Sure.
Absolutely. So then Dutch, this is a good story. I think you really enjoy this. Dutch comes after 2 years and he says to Roy, he says, "I need you to go with me to Houston, Texas." He says, "There's two promoters in Houston and there's a war going on." He says, so the two promoters their business is falling to pieces. And he says, they made a bet. And the bet was that you hire yourself the best shooter you can and the other promoter hire the best shooter you can. And he says, whoever wins the match, we'll both promote the match, and when they have the match, whoever wins Houston. The other one's got to quit. He can never promote anymore. That was the agreement they had. And Dutch says, one of them picked me. He says, "I'm going to Houston. I want you to go with me and watch my back." And so he takes him in a Model T. This is in 1922. In a Model T, they go across from Amarillo to Houston. It takes 4 days. In a Model T, and there's no highways in a lot of it, so they just went across fields and cut the barbed wire if they needed to, and just rode across the state to Houston. They get there and they're going to have the shoot, and Roy says they go to the ring for the shoot, and he says he had never seen Dutch do anything other than wrestle, and he said, so they locked up the guy that Dutch is wrestling with for the rights to Houston, basically. And he said the guy pushed Dutch into the ropes, the very first move they made. And he said the referee was a part of the deal. The referee got between the two of them, and he kind of slid in front of Dutch so that the wrestler could hit Dutch. He gave him a little opening. He kind of blinded Dutch's view, and then Dutch caught the punch. He blocked the punch, and he hit the guy. And Roy said it sounded like somebody shot a gun. He said he never heard a sound like that. And he said that the guy backed up the wrestler that he hit. He said he wobbled back on his feet, and he said when I looked at him, he said his left eyeball had fallen out of the socket. He broke the orbital bone in his eye, and his eye was hanging down. And he said he fell on his knees. He started vomiting right there. He said the bell rang. It didn't last 2 minutes, the whole deal. And he said then they came in the ring. The guys wanted to help him. They put his eye back up there, and they put a towel over it, and they got him to the dressing room. And Dutch told Roy's about to leave the ring with him. Dutch going to the ring, he says, "You get right on my back, boy." He says, "I don't." And Roy said, "Why?" And he says, "I want you to get the knife." You know, he was thinking that somebody was going to try to kill him before he got to the field. Okay,
Absolutely.
so he's popped his orbital bone. His eye fell out, and they start the dressing room. And Dutch says, "No, we go to his dressing room." And Roy said, "Oh, why?" And he said, "Follow me. Stay on my back again. Don't let him kill me." And so he gets to the dressing room with Roy, and Roy said he went over, and the guy's sitting on the stool, and he's got the towel over his eye. They're about to take him to the hospital, and Roy tapped him on the shoulder. The Dutch taps the guy on the shoulder, and he said when the guy looked up, he saw it was Dutch. He was like, "Oh God, he come to get me again," right? One of those deals. And he goes. Dutch says to him, he goes, he says, you're really lucky. He goes, a good thing you quit. He said, I was already looking at that other eye. That's some badasses there. When you get
I love it. So now, fast forward a little bit, somewhere around the 1940s, 50s, somewhere around there, Roy Welch gets the idea to build an arena. And my understanding is that he built this place himself.
He might have. Roy did all kinds of things. I've never heard about his arena. What city was that in?
I'm using that term arena. It basically, what the story goes, that he took an old barn and created a place for people to come and see wrestling.
Oh, I can believe that. I can definitely believe that. You know.
Yeah, and that's the story. And by the way, if you're interested in who told the story, it was your brother, Robert.
Okay. Well, hell, Rob might have worked out there. He's old as hell anyway, Rob.
Oh, geez.
He could have worked out in that building.
That's funny.
My granddad, I don't know if you knew this, my granddad trained the first wrestling bear. The very first wrestling bear.
You know, I did know that. I actually did know that.
Yeah, her name was Ginger. And Roy was so crazy. He was so bad. He was so tough that the bear was scared of him. That's it. And this bear had all of her claws and all of her teeth. You know, when they train bears nowadays, they pull out their canine teeth and they pull out claws. They put it all, and he was the only one who could put the muzzle on her, and he put these mittens over her feet. And he kept the bear in the backyard, staked out, and let her out of her cage a lot, and she stayed in the backyard. My dad was about 12 years old, and the bear got him. The bear got hold of him. He got too close to the bear, and the bear was going to kill him. And Roy happened to be home that day, or I wouldn't be here. And Roy came around, screamed at the bear, and the bear ran. She was scared of Roy. And I asked him, I said, "How do you scare a bear? How do you make a bear scared of you, right?" And he said, "I slapped him." And I said, "Oh, wait a minute." I said, bears will slap your head off, I hear, And he goes, "Not my head, by God." He said, "I slapped that bear." He said, "Until that bear just let me do whatever I wanted to do." So, I'm telling you, man, he was a pretty rugged dude.
I heard some stories. Dan, go ahead. You got Ron Fuller. Go ask away, brother.
Oh man, this is great. Ron, I got started in the wrestling as it were as a historian, the work in different syndicated column I wrote, and then obviously before I joined the podcast. So hearing these old school tales. I mean, I know the original Dutch Mantel was a very tough looking dude, and some of your history, obviously, you've come up before. We've had several Tennessee legends on the show, and your name always comes up anytime you talk Tennessee or Florida. And I want to say I appreciate this honor being able to talk to you. I was hoping you could actually expand on something. You brought up obviously the original Dutch Mantel. Back when you're talking 1910, 1920s, photographs really weren't, and obviously there's no video, but photographs really weren't what they were. The pictures of some of the talent back then, especially Dutch Mantel. I mean, if you were to grow just a grizzled, tough-looking guy in a lab, he would come out looking like 1910s Dutch Mantel. Yeah. I'm wondering how, even at the time, how much of that was legitimate? These guys were, broken teeth and scarred faces, and how much of that was really them, and how much of it was, I hate to say, but like the old carnival where, maybe the strong man would oil himself up a little bit, not drink water that day. How much of that was them, and how much of that was maybe a little bit of showmanship?
Oh, I would say there's a little bit of it. I got a great story about Dutch. My granddad told me. He says Dutch Mantell was one of the richest dudes in the West. I mean, he had a Model T Ford when nobody could afford a car,
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked my granddad, I said, well, how did he get rich? And he said he had the greatest gimmick going. He said he would travel to the old towns out west, and he said he would go into town in the bar late in the afternoon or when the guys were starting to congregate, and he would be real mouthy. He was a small guy, he wasn't real big. He was real mouthy, and he would say, oh, damn, I'm the fastest guy in this town. I'll race any sumbitch in this town. And then he would get some bets up. People didn't know who the hell he was, and they thought, well, maybe this guy's fast, maybe. So he'd get a few bets up, and he'd go out in the street, and they'd mark out a little raceway, and they'd say, go, and the guy'd run off and leave him. So he'd go back in the bar, and he'd be hot, throw his hat down. Ah, damn, I can't believe it, but I'm strong. He said, I can beat anybody arm wrestling. Well, Betts got bigger this time, right? Because he's small, and they know he can't run. He's full of crap, probably, and so they bet a little more this go around, right? And the bets go up a little higher, and then they go out. They sit at a table in the middle of the saloon, and a few more people congregate. They go running out there, and they go, "Hey, there's an idiot down here betting, and he don't know his ass from a hole in the ground. Just you can get paid quick, right?" So the saloon about fills up, and then they have the arm wrestling contest, and the guy just slams his arm down. He don't even try, wham, and then everybody's like, wow, boy, Pat, give me that money. So he's paying out a little bit of bread to all of them. He's paying off, and then he's mad. He's really cussing now, and he goes, ah, damn, he goes, I'll beat anybody wrestling here, anybody. Oh, man, Roy said that Dutch said the bar would empty. They'd run out of the bar, man, and they'd go get all their buddies, everybody in town, and they'd go find the big tough guy in town, right? And they'd bring him back. Man. And then Dutch would say, I double the bet. By God, double the bet. And, so then he's got every dollar in town just about, right? And then they would go out in the road right out in the front of the old saloon, and Dutch would just decimate the poor son of a gun. I mean, it wouldn't last 30 seconds. And then he would fill his wallet, and he would go 10, 15 miles down the road and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And he got to be fabulously wealthy.
God bless. That's beautiful.
That's
I love
hilarious.
It. Mike Messier, I know you are the world's #1 Ron Fuller fan, so and plus you set this up. So now, my friend, have at it.
Well, Ron Fuller.
Ask as many questions as you want.
Well, I've got two big ones I'd like to get in, but first one, Ron, thanks for being on the show. And Ron, watching some of your matches, it's interesting. You're billed at 6'9", and I was thinking of guys like yourself, Don Leo Jonathan, I think was 6'9". I think Mean Mark Callis, or the Undertaker, as we've known him for the last 20 or 30 years, is 6'10". And I was just kind of wondering about the actual in-ring style that you had, because at 6'9", you by and most standards are close to a giant, but not quite in that Andre the Giant or Big John Studd level of height. So what I liked about guys like yourself, Don Leo Jonathan and Mean Mark Callis, and the Spoiler, is that you guys could still have a traditional wrestling match, but still have that height advantage. So you can take advantage of your height, but you're not the stereotypical giant either. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, how your size, being kind of that almost a giant size, fit into your in-ring career.
What I did when I first started wrestling, and I was tall and I was thin. I kind of set my training. I wanted to be just as fast as a small guy. I didn't want to be the giant. I wanted to be a big, tall, strong guy that could move just as quick as a small guy could. And I really pretty much accomplished that. I threw drop kicks. I did everything. Anybody flying head scissors, I didn't care what it was. I felt like I had to learn to do it. And so my style fit that I could work with everybody, and it made sense. I mean, if I'd only worked with guys who were 6'9", like you say, there wasn't a bunch of them. It'd have been hard for me to find opponents. Been hard for me to find work. So it worked out good.
Yeah, I think it did too. And then that kind of goes with my follow-up question, which is, I was very good friends with Ox Baker, the master of the Hurt Punch, and Ox even called it the Hurt Punch after Stan Stasiak passed away because they both did the Heart Punch. I know that Ox traveled around the whole territories, and I'm guessing that you and Ox crossed paths. I'm pretty sure you did. Did you and Ox Baker ever work together? Because just on a personal level, he was such a good friend of mine. I spoke at his funeral. He was really like a father figure to me in wrestling. And me and my buddy David Gear both really cherished our friendship with Ox. Do you have any Ox Baker stories? Or?
Oh, I wrestled Ox several times. Ox wrestled for me in my southeastern Pensacola territory in 1979. Hulk Hogan was breaking in with me at the same time. Yep. So I had Hogan and Ox and myself, and I had two territories at that time, one in Pensacola and one in Knoxville, both of them called Southeastern. And I would go back and forth between the two territories. Ox I worked with many times. I really liked Ox. He was a great guy. And, people look at Ox and he's a pretty scary looking dude, I mean, you had to really think, well, what am I going to encounter here, But Ox was a very, very nice guy, and I had pretty decent matches with Ox. And you mentioned Big John Studd. I worked with Big John Studd in St. Louis. I've worked with Big John Studd before too. A lot of big guys. You mentioned Don Leo Jonathan way back there. He's one of the guys I wanted to. I kind of copied as much as I could John Leo Jonathan's work. I mean, he was, to me, one of the best big men probably ever worked.
Oh, my God, yeah. Absolutely.
And then
you'll get no argument from me. I'll tell you what, he was absolutely amazing. Right. Can I ask you a question? Talking along the same line, and Mikey, I'll get back to you in just a second. But you're talking about big guys, and the physical factor. And I got a question for you. And I've seen a lot of big guys who come across as lumbering. They come across as clumsy or sloppy. How effective can a good big guy be with regard to ticket sales? Because big guys are not necessarily known for being the best ticket movers. They're great for attractions. The exception to the rule, and I'm not saying this because you're here, but the exception to the rule, Ron Fuller and Robert Fuller. Because you guys are probably two of the biggest guys back in the day when, let's be honest, you didn't have a lot of the 6'10", 7-foot guys running around. It was rare. We try to make a point of being able, like I said, I think the secret was being able to work with everybody. When you own your own company, how do you make it believable, though? It's, you know what I mean? How do you make that believable for big, 6'9", 6'10" guy? Keep in mind, anybody you wrestle is going to be smaller than you. Pretty much everybody, right?
You have to learn how to sell. You have to learn how to sell differently. And you got to learn to sell for little guys in some respects, but you don't want to overdo it to where you kill yourself. You want to keep your own strength. You want to get over yourself. But I always felt like smaller guys, if they could work and then they were really good, and if their style was solid, where when they threw a punch that you could sell it, then I would sell for them. Otherwise, if it wasn't, then obviously I wasn't going to hurt myself to get them over. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you answered it that way, because Ron, that's exactly where I was going. Mikey, go ahead.
My next question would be about the early 80s, maybe 82, 83. It was almost, what comes to my mind, Ron, but correct me if I'm wrong, almost like a wrestling version of the Hatfields and the McCoys between Ron Fuller, the Tennessee stud, his younger brother, Rob Fuller, cousin Jimmy Golden against Bob Armstrong and various Armstrong family members.
Oh, boy.
And just the passion and the heat, the excitement, the emotional investment of the fans, which is something that this show continuously talks about, that we want to see that emotional investment come back to professional wrestling, regardless of its WWE, AEW, New Japan. Emotional investment. Can you tell us how that overrunning storyline of you and Bob Armstrong at the focus of it, but other guys getting in the mix as like a family feud, how that affected that fan base, and maybe if there's any, I'm always hoping there's some promoter of the future listening to our show, some 12-year-old kid that's going to save the business in 20 years. But can you tell us how some of those dynamics were approached from a promotional standpoint, the in-ring action and everything else, the storyline arc?
We probably had the greatest running feud in the history of wrestling, the Armstrongs and the Fullers. Jimmy Golden, my cousin, he was part of the stud stable. All of that stuff got started, and it just kind of and then Bob just happened to have some of the greatest workers coming up underneath him. Brad Armstrong, in my opinion, one of the greatest workers of all time. And he had Scott, he had Steve, he had all these young sons coming on. And it was perfect. It was perfect for us to have a stable. We're the heels and Bob to be the babyface. We actually really kicked that angle off between us, though, in 1982 in a world championship match between me and Flair, and Bob Armstrong was the referee. Bob had never healed in his life. And we talked about it. I said, Bob, we want to turn you heel, man. And I didn't know whether he was going to be a great heel or not. Had no idea. But, I thought that if this works, we can turn the family situation around. All of a sudden, they're the heels and we're the baby faces. We'll get another 2 or 3 years run out of it. So Bob turned heel that night. We had such a hot finish that night that Flair, when I told him what the finish was, he looked at me and he laughed and he said, Ron, he goes, we're going to get killed tonight. And I said, oh, well, Rick, I know it's pretty hot. And Mobile, Alabama is where we did it. It was a very hot city. I got arrested the very first time I ever wrestled there as a heel. I got taken to jail. So, it was a hot town to work in, and Flair knew it. And Flair was like, oh, my God, Ron, this is horrible. And then Bob says, Ron, well, do whatever you want. Bob turned out to be one of the greatest heels I ever saw. And what we did is we didn't do like tradition would have it. We didn't have him have his sons turn heel. We had him turn heel on all of them, even his sons. He slapped Brad on TV because Brad couldn't beat a guy.
And Ron, that was the genius of it. That was the genius. It was just Bullet Bob. That was it.
Yep.
And nobody saw it coming. Not even
no. It was unreal that night. I mean, the fans were they were shocked. It was like, wow, what's going on here? Nobody saw that coming. Yeah. So, and that's where we rode. We parlayed that into a probably 5-year running feud between the Armstrongs and the stud stable.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Go ahead, Mikey.
Well, it kind of reminds me a bit of the Von Erichs Freebirds feud, except in your case, you did the group heel face switch, which even the Freebirds and the Von Erichs never attempted that. And I couldn't help but think of the 2010 era John Cena, who really could have been freshened up if he had turned heel at some point. And it's just too bad that pro wrestling, or the WWE especially, has gotten so regulated by itself that they don't take more chances. Can you talk about, as a promoter, maybe I'm wrong, but is it important to take chances with storytelling?
Oh, yeah. Question. Yeah. When you're a promoter and you're a booker, what you want to do is you want to keep them sitting on the edge of their seat. You never want them to know where it's going. And if you can do that when you're building your territory or you're running your company, that's what fills your buildings, because they say, oh, I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. And this Bob Armstrong angle we just talked about, there wasn't a single person. There was still 11,000 people in that building. There wasn't a single person that said Bob Armstrong's going to become a heel tonight. I mean, none of them. If somebody would have told you that going in, you'd have said, bullshit. You know, that ain't.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, it's all about storyline. It was all about storyline. It was all about being 5 moves ahead of your fans. You know, they think they got it figured, and then, wow, they go, oh, my God, what, how did that happen? You know, and that's what it was all about back in those days.
You know, Ron, we had, the other day we had gentleman on the show named Dave LaGreca from Busted Open Radio. Interestingly enough, he grew up in the Northeast where I grew up. In fact, not far from me. But also, interestingly enough, the first wrestling that I ever saw and that he ever saw, and we talked about it on the show, was wrestling from Georgia with Gordon Soley.
Right.
Georgia Championship Wrestling. First wrestling I ever saw. And it was, in fact, Dan's going to pop when I say this. We looked at wrestling from Georgia as, quote, you're laughing already, Dan, the real stuff, and WWF was the fake stuff.
Yeah, I can believe that. I can believe that.
Here's the question I got for you. Was it intentional to base Southern wrestling in that element of realism? Was that a purposeful, deliberate thing that promoters did down south?
Absolutely. My granddad was a shooter. We talked about it way back in the early 20s. My father was a shooter. I was taught to shoot when I was 13 years old. Right. Guys would come out and knock on my dad's door and say, I want to wrestle a wrestler. And he'd say, can you beat this skinny kid? And and nobody ever got past me. You know, so when you grow up with that in your background, you want your sport to be solid. You don't want people to see through it. And you go to the extremes. You don't blade, you bust each other the hard way. I mean, you take it to the next level.
Yes, sir.
And when you do that, you build fans that believe from the bottom of their hearts, because they've never seen anything that they couldn't believe in. You give them stuff to believe in, and that's what made it. That's what makes it. That's gone. That's gone.
Man, oh my God, you brother!
Be there anymore.
I'll tell you what, my brother. We had Dan and Mikey were on the show. In fact, when we discussed it, we're like begging, like, where is our wrestling again? What happened to our beloved sport? Dan, I want you to pick up on where I left off on the realism element, and then throw in a couple of 3 or 4 or 5 questions of your own. Go ahead.
Well, no, it worked. Angela's absolutely right, and that's why I was cracking up before he finished the sentence, because I grew up in an area where I got both. I got the NWA on one channel and the WWF on the other, and then the local stores that had all the territory tapes, so Tennessee and Florida and all, and there was definitely a feeling there, and that was part of the aura that your family had, was that the Fullers were the smartest family in wrestling, not just your in-ring psychology, but everything that you did. And it really added to that level of realism, because there were moments that your feud, you know, Mikey touched on your feud with the Armstrongs, where who knows? I mean, you guys probably beating each other up in the parking lot when the cameras aren't rolling. Like, as a fan, you get that feeling that's long since been gone. But I was hoping, actually, speaking of the plans and the old times, one of my more favorite moments you guys had during this feud with the Armstrongs was you introduced the Southeast Continental title, and you gave it to Michael Hayes. With, of course, that led to that story where you beat him and you wanted to leave the territory, but you were contractually obligated to stay, and you and Armstrong fought over that. I'm curious if you would mind to go off what we talked about last week, kind of peel the curtain back a little bit. How does that conversation go about? We're going to introduce a new title. We're going to put it on a star as big as Michael Hayes is, really just as a prop to continue your feud with the Armstrongs. How does that conversation come about?
You know, we used to do our booking traveling on the road. We lived in Pensacola. We would go to Birmingham. It's a 4-hour trip. And sometimes me and Bob, before I was a heel and before he was a heel, we would go as baby faces and we would talk on that way home. And we would come up with all these outlandish ideas. I mean, you spent that 4 hours not just drinking beer and talking about your girlfriend. You talked about business. It was important. In fact, we like to talk about it more than anything else. You know, it was like, and the great thing about it is when you came up with these rare ideas and you went in these wild directions, it just made business better. You know, and so it was like you take your travel time and you turned it into your money time. And it's where you created your ideas. That's where you got your stuff at, was on these trips.
I like that. If I may follow up on that, actually, speaking of the realism of wrestling, you guys were still bound by this narrative of kayfabe. How hard was it for you and the Armstrongs to work together? Like, I mean, obviously you couldn't. You traveled together. You had to. You guys worked together a lot outside the business. But heaven forbid the wrong fan or the wrong group sees you guys at a restaurant or a bar together. How did that? Can you kind of tell us how life was having to keep the realism while still having to run the company?
It was easy. It was easy because I had grown up in that. I'd seen my father do it for many, many years. I watched Roy do it. I mean, if you broke kayfabe and you worked for me, you were gone. It was a one-time mistake, you know.
Yeah.
Hey, you were sitting in that restaurant with that heel, you're fired. You're gone. You know, I mean, and if you didn't do that, how are you going to maintain that legitimacy that you want to create with your fans? And like you say, one guy sees that and he tells 100 people, and they tell 100 more people. And, you know, so it was just, it was known when you came to work for us that that's a no-no. And the quickest way to get your ass out of there is break kayfabe.
You know, Ron, we actually heard, and Dan, I'll give you the questioning back in just a second. It's interesting. We had one of our favorite people on the show here is Karen McDaniel, Wahoo's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And Karen told us a story and I didn't realize that this extended to the wives too. So she said that if she ever got caught at a local coffee shop or a little diner or someplace with the wife or girlfriend of Wahoo's opponent or nemesis, she said that the guys would get fired based on what the wives did. If they broke kayfabe, the guys would get fired. And does that happen in your territory?
Oh yeah, I mean you had to include the wives, because fans, if they took their wives to the matches, the fans, it don't take them long. They talk all the time. They go, "Hey, that's so and so's wife," and that's, and if they see you someplace, I'll tell you how strict I was about the way I was brought up. I was married 3 times and I never smartened up a single wife.
Dan,
I didn't smarten up my own wife.
Dan,
pick up that's how important it was for me. When they saw the blood, they were like, wow, geez, man, whatever it was. And that's a commitment to the sport that's gone. I mean, obviously it's gone, never be there. But there weren't very many people that were as committed to the sport to do that, to preserve the kayfabe part of it like
Amen.
that.
If I may, then to look at that, because since you said you hadn't, which that's quoted a century right there, 3 wives didn't smart up a single one of them. When we had different wrestling wives on, we actually had a wrestling wives themed show, and everybody who's ever been in the business as a wife, a girlfriend, had a very similar story. If you don't mind me asking, then if your wives weren't involved behind the scenes, because really, And even some of the wrestlers we've had on the show have said that the wives and girlfriends and that secondary family was kind of the heart and soul of what was happening behind the scenes.
Dan,
He had the locker room, but they
tell Ron who we had on.
Oh, right. The wives show, we had Karen McDaniel, we had Jimmy Snuka and Bruiser Brody's wife as well. And so, I mean, those three of the best backstage, or I should say backstage, but three of the best behind the scenes stories from amazing talents. And I'm wondering then if you don't mind me asking, if your wife wasn't involved in the way they were, then who did a lot of that for you? Or did you guys just do all that yourself and kind of figure it out?
Well, if you're talking about the business part of it, I had one wife that worked in the business. She traveled and she sold tickets. She took care of box offices, and you couldn't get anybody to trust any more than that to take care of your money.
Yeah,
and she had heart and soul in it. She realized that this is our livelihood, and so you had to. You had to do it. Was kind of strange the way you dealt with your family members and that type of thing, about the kayfabe part of stuff. But we were really lucky. I mean, Bob Armstrong's wife, who just passed away a few days ago, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
I heard that.
And was a great lady, and she was a perfect example of a wrestler's wife. I mean, when she went, she would sit in the very back. She wouldn't let anybody know she was there or who she was. She wouldn't dare tell anybody, "Oh, that's my husband up there," or "That's my sons." I mean, everybody, a lot of the women that were around the wrestlers that we dealt with, they were pretty much kayfabe too. They knew that you had to protect it. It was vital to your livelihood. You were stupid not to protect it, as a matter of fact.
That's fair. Sure. Well, if I can, then one final question, and I'll throw it back to these guys. Karen McDaniel had a lot of stories about designing robes and wardrobe and whatnot. So I'm really curious, while that's still fresh in my head, when the Tennessee Stud debuted, he had a mask. Who designed the mask that you wore?
The lady that made most of my robes made Flair's robes. She made a lot of other guys. Who made Johnny Walker Wrestling 2's robe. Olivia Walker, Johnny Walker's wife.
That's right.
Yep. And
Karen told us that. I forgot all about that.
Yeah,
you're right.
She wasn't just a seamstress for wrestlers. She started out as a country and western singers, Porter Wagner and Dolly Parton and all those sequined outfits that they were wearing back in those days. Mm-hmm. She was making the outfits for the country and western stars, and that's why Flair liked her jacket style. He was lots of sequins. I never used a lot of sequins on my jacket, but just the back and the logo. But she did everything. My mask, she did my robes, all of it. And what a great lady she was too. Great personality.
Yeah.
And did tremendous work. Beautiful work.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we just lost Johnny Walker too, just days ago. In fact, what are your memories? Give us while it's still fresh in my mind, give us a little bit of some of your recollections or your memories of Mr. Wrestling 2 Johnny Walker.
Geez, Johnny and I go way back. He's a good friend of my dad. He goes back into Roy's day almost, way back. I'll tell you my best memory of Johnny, oddly enough, guys, is a year ago in May of 2019. Johnny lives in Hawaii, and Johnny came to every year there's a Continental Wrestling reunion in a town called Dothan, Alabama, and Johnny Walker was invited to that. And Johnny and I sat on the tailgate of a pickup truck, but right next to the building, and everybody's all inside. And we had probably 45 minutes to talk, he and I, about our career. I worked with Johnny Walker the very first night that he won the Georgia Heavyweight Championship. He won it 10 times. And I went into that territory when the Atlanta Wrestling War started, and they were having the war. Watts was going to come to Florida and become the booker. And Watts wouldn't put over Wrestling 2 because Watts didn't get along with Wrestling 2. He didn't think he was big enough, whatever, to put him over. So Bill Watts picked me out of Florida. He said, they asked him, who will you put over? And he said, I'll put over Ron Fuller out of Florida. So I went into Atlanta, and Watts put the Georgia strap on me. 3 weeks later, I went and put it on Wrestling 2. And Wrestling 2 caught fire and became probably the biggest star in the history of Georgia wrestling. Undoubtedly the biggest star in the history of Georgia wrestling. And Johnny was the type of worker that he didn't make any money till he put a mask on. He actually, I know Johnny really well. He actually worked for his first 9 years without the mask as Rubber Man.
Right.
Johnny Walker.
Yeah, he sure did.
And then he came into Florida. He quit for 2 years, and then they brought him into Florida, and they put a mask on him, and he called him the Grappler. He did better. But when he left there, he only worked for 2 years in Florida, and he quit again. Now, this is a story that's a pretty amazing story. He went when he quit the second time, he moved to Tennessee, and he started working in the gas station, pumping gas. Johnny Walker.
Yeah.
Okay. Leo Garibaldi's in Atlanta with Ole, and they've got Wrestling 1 there. Tim Woods, Mr. Wrestling there. Okay.
Yeah.
And Leo gets this idea. He says, I want to, we need another wrestler, Mr. Wrestling, another Mr. Wrestling. And so he tells Ole about it. And because Leo had been there in 72 in Florida when Johnny was there as the Grappler, he remembered him. And he said, we need to find Johnny Walker. And they tracked him down. They drove Ole and Leo Garibaldi to Tennessee and to the gas station where Johnny was working, and took him off to the side. And they said, here's what we want to do. Leo says, here's what I want to do, Johnny. I want you to be Mr. Wrestling number 2. I want to ultimately I want you and Woods to be partners. I want to make big stars. Then I want you to turn on him. He gave him the whole program for 2 years in advance. Yeah. And Johnny says, okay, geez, man, this sounds like you're going to use me, right? Mm-hmm. And Johnny went in there, and the rest is history, man. He cranked that.
Yeah, boy.
That angle blew Johnny Walker to the top, and he stayed there for years and years in Georgia with that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ron, we actually had Magnum TA here, and when Magnum was here, it was bittersweet. It really was, listening to Magnum. He had that angle with Johnny Walker. Dan, you remember Magnum telling us that story?
Yes, sir.
It was, yeah, go ahead and relate that story to Ron. It's really, I want you to hear this, Ron.
Well, he had, I just want to make sure we're on the same page here. You're talking about when he first came up, when he was the rough business, that one, or?
Yeah.
The Rubber Man? Oh, you're talking about Magnum?
Well, yeah, because obviously, the narrative behind Magnum TA being the greatest what if story in the history of wrestling.
Yeah.
But he talked about coming up and the for lack of a better term, the way he told it was the very rough handling he got at the hands of Johnny Walker, and it was more of he wasn't getting the what's the term? Potatoed as much as he was. This was the evidence that, I mean, when Walker was going to go that rough on you, he knew you had something. This guy is going to be huge, and I'm going to beat the tar out of him until we polish this stone. And he did. And obviously you saw, well, unfortunately, the great what if story, but Magnum really had the narration that if he didn't get those initial, for lack of a better term, beatings and rough matches with Wrestling 2 coming up, he would never have become the star he was.
Yeah, it's a great concept. And Johnny was like that. Johnny he liked to work stiff. He liked to work tight.
Yeah, we heard.
Yeah, and the night that I put the championship belt on him, we worked a finish in which we both went over the top rope and out onto the floor. I brought him back into the ring. He got on the apron. I was in the ring. I picked him up, and I brought him up to drop him on the top of his head. He pulled a gimmick out, and he hit me with the gimmick. Then he put the gimmick up, and I struggled to my feet, and he hit me. I was the first guy he ever hit the bionic knee on. Okay?
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
He had not developed that finish. And then he says, look, Ron, he says, let's do that part of it. But he says, I want to hit you with this running knee lift. And I said,
Yeah.
well, I've never seen that, Johnny. And he says, oh, hey, don't worry, Ron. You know, it'll be good. You know, and he set me up, and it wasn't the knee lift that bothered me. It was the slap in the back. He would
Yeah.
always slap you at the same time he hit you with the knee to get that sound. And
Oh
so,
my God,
Johnny
yeah.
was a tremendous worker. I really loved Johnny, and guys didn't respect Johnny. He got respect. Yeah.
It was $1 million knee lift. I think it was called
Yeah,
$1 million
exactly.
knee lift.
Yep.
Ron,
$1
why
million knee
was
lift.
Johnny
Yeah,
not?
that's it.
Why was Johnny not bigger than he should have been? This guy should have been a superstar, a megastar. What was? I mean, I know he had some. Well, I'll call it issues. He had some. You mentioned he quit and he went back and then he quit again. He had some issues that whether they were personal demons, I don't know. I never knew the man, but for whatever reason, he could never get his footing. He could never get his. He never got into a comfort zone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think you understand where I'm going with it. And I'm not, rest in peace. Mr. Wrestling too, but for whatever reason, I don't know why, but he just never found his place for some odd reason.
I think his career didn't develop until he was way into his 30s, maybe even close to 40, before he became wrestling too.
Okay.
His good days were behind him almost. He happened to get into a tremendous angle with a great gimmick, and he lived his gimmick. That was the one thing about Johnny. I don't know if you guys are aware, he had a tremendous relationship with President Jimmy Carter.
Yes, sir.
Fabulous. And Jimmy Carter invited him to the inauguration when he became president. And Johnny says, yeah, I'll come if I can wear my mask. And and Jimmy Carter went to the trouble to find out from the Secret Service if they let him, and he said no. And Johnny says, I'm not coming. I mean, he was crazy like that. You never saw Johnny without. He'd take a shower with his hood on.
No.
And the guys we knew who the hell he was. I mean, what the hell are you doing, Johnny? So you don't have to kayfabe me. What the hell? Take your mask off, right?
Exactly.
I mean, he was just really, really into that gimmick, and he lived it. He lived it.
Mikey, go ahead, brother.
Well, I'm just glad that Johnny didn't have a little mask to wear on his other anyway. But that would be something to see. Ron, you mentioned Wrestling Wars, and fans today, younger fans, are getting all hot and bothered about AEW versus NXT, but this is nothing new for wrestling historians. And I saw something about Ron Wright tried to challenge you in your promotion, if I'm not mistaken, at one point. And can you tell us what it's like to be in the heart of the battle, the heart of the dragon of a territorial wrestling war where two promotions are competing more or less for the same audience? Can you kind of expand on that from the promoter side of things?
Good question.
It's sad. It's a sad thing. I went to Knoxville and started Southeastern Wrestling in 1974. I built it into probably the best small wrestling territory in the world. Never was there one better than that was. Short trips, big money, great talent. Had a great cruise, one after another after another. 1979, I got into a situation. It wasn't just Ron Wright. It was Bob Roop. It was Ronnie Garvin. It was Bob Orton Jr. and the great Malenko. 5 basically of my guys decided that they wanted to try to take the territory over. And so we battled through the summer of 1979. And I watched my company that I had taken years to build that was selling out everywhere we went, and I watched those houses die during that time frame. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Plan B videos. You ever seen that?
I've watched him, and as a Ronnie Garvin fan from the Crockett, it was very disappointing, to be honest, because I've always been a Ronnie Garvin fan, and I saw him defend his title against Ric Flair in Baltimore, October 13th, 1987. I have a photograph that I took. It was very disappointing for me as a wrestling fan to see Ronnie in that Plan B thing. It was worse than Eddie Mansfield.
Well, can you imagine those five guys sit there and just off the business? I mean, just plainly said, it's nothing real about it. And can you imagine? This is 1979. What would have happened if that video had ever gotten out? It would have put an early end to wrestling. Basically,
oh my God,
it would have really affected all the territories. It would have affected everybody, all of professional wrestling. So it was a horrible experience for me. I sold out to Jim Barnett, and I left. I went. I already had another territory in Pensacola, the South End, I called it, and I went to Pensacola, and I just committed myself to building Pensacola. I actually built twice as good a territory after I left Knoxville as the one I had built in Knoxville.
While we're on the topic of the rivalries and territories, I was wondering, as somebody who was there kind of in the heart of everything, if you had any inside information or if you could expand on the rivalry between Jerry Jarrett and Nick Gulas.
Oh, well, yes, man. Nick Gulas and my grandfather Roy were partners.
Yes.
From way back. Actually, my Roy went in there in the 30s in Tennessee, started building the South. And he didn't just build Tennessee, he went all the way to Gulf of Mexico. He was in 12 states at one time. And so he took on Nick Gulas as his partner. And Nick and Roy were about as different as anything you could possibly imagine. Roy was an old-time shooter and a gruff and tough guy, and Nick was oh man, real nice. Oh, please, I hope you like my payoff. And it was, they were anything but a match. And so when Roy kind of started fading out of the picture, it left Nick there basically by himself, and Jerry and Roy had always kind of run the western side of the Tennessee territory. Nick ran the eastern side, the Chattanooga, the Birmingham, the Nashville. Roy ran the Memphis and the towns on that side of it. So when they actually went to war, there's a whole lot behind that war. I don't know if you guys are aware, my dad was really big there long before Jarrett. Dad went in there in 1959. Memphis was one of the deadest towns in America. Dad drew in Russwood Park 30,000 people to watch Sputnik Monroe and Billy Wicks wrestle for a Cadillac.
I was going to ask you, Ron. I was going to ask you if that was folklore or whether that actually really happened. I heard they wrestled over a car. Yeah, they wrestled for a car.
Yeah, they wrestle. Yeah, Dad used to do it all the time. My dad drew some monster crowds in his career. In Mobile, Alabama, in Ladd Stadium, he and Mario Galento, with Joe Louis as the referee, drew 40,000 people in 1957.
In the 50s.
Okay? In the 50s.
God, that's crazy.
40,000 people in Mobile, Alabama. And then he went to Memphis and drew right around 30,000. And in Atlanta, we went to Atlanta when I was a kid in Atlanta. Atlanta was on its ass. It was doing terrible. And he went in and he built Atlanta in 2 years from 64 and 66. He drew in the Ponce de Leon baseball stadium. He wrestled Mario Galento and Rocky Marciano was the referee. They drew 30-something thousand. 30-something thousand in Atlanta.
That's
and I hear people saying that the biggest crowds ever drawn in Atlanta was in the Omni. Bullshit. I saw 30,000 plus in that Ponce de Leon baseball stadium.
Yes, sir.
In the summer of 66. So,
that's crazy. I have to ask you, we heard, from several sources, but let me just tell you, a couple of the people that are really, really good friends of our show are, of course, superstar Bill Dundee and the handsome one himself, the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. Jimmy's a good friend of mine. I know Jimmy 33, 34 years now. Bill Dundee is just, as ornery as ever, straight shooter as ever. He's a good friend of our show, Ron, and they've told stories, and I want to kind of clarify the territory system in Tennessee. Now, Jarrett, from what I know and what we've been told, had the Jackson, Tennessee, Nashville, the fairgrounds area, up around the West Memphis area over in Arkansas.
Right.
Okay. And
Yep.
then
And he also had Louisville,
yeah,
Evansville.
and they tell me that, and yeah, that's right, Evansville, Indiana, Louisville, Kentucky. But they tell us that Nick Goulas was basically regulated to that one area. Basically, just they gave him enough, to wet his beak, because he was such a notoriously horrible promoter. He was notoriously cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
He didn't do the right thing for business, not for the boys, not for the fans. What was it about Nick that he just, for whatever reason, Ron, he just didn't get it? And why did he always want to push his kid, George Goulas? You know where I'm going with this. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, absolutely. Well, Nick became Roy's partner because Nick was a pretty decent businessman. He was good at keeping the books, but he didn't know shit about wrestling. He had no concept of how to make that work.
Yeah.
He had guys that he made one of the critical mistakes that you never make as a promoter. He had guys that he wanted to take care of, and he wanted to treat them differently than some of the other boys. And when you start doing that, you're on the way to killing your own business. So then, like you said, he had George along the way. His payoffs were so notoriously bad that I remember Jack Briscoe and I having a conversation when I first went into Florida, and I asked Jack if he'd ever worked in Nashville. And he said, "Yeah, Ron." He goes, "I worked in Nashville. I sure did." And I said, "Well, how did that go?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I went in there, man, I was driving a Cadillac." And he said, "I came out on a Greyhound." I mean, he said, "They starved me. Nick Goulas starved me to death. He didn't like me. He didn't like my wrestling." So Nick didn't have an eye for talent. And where he really, really buried himself was with his son, because he wanted his son to be a star. His son was not an athlete. He had no talent.
Not at all.
And he just, once he made his son the champion, he really signed his death warrant in the wrestling profession.
I heard that, Ron. His son was just a scrawny-looking, skinny kid that couldn't fatten up if he tried. Not a good-looking guy either. I'm sorry to say that, but he wasn't a handsome kid.
Oh, no. I tell you, he worked for me one time. My dad forced me when Knoxville was just taking off.
Yeah.
We were selling out the Coliseum. They'd never even run in the Coliseum. It was too big to go to. We were selling it out pretty much every week. And my dad, I had one of these big shows. It was me against Harley Race. And Dad says, "Can you put George Goulas on your card?" And I was like, "Oh, my." I said, "Wait a minute, Dad. George Goulas, hell, I like to, he can come in at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We're setting up the ring and work, but I don't want anybody, any 7 or 8, 10,000 people seeing him, Anyway, I used him. And because as a favor for my dad, and Dad says, "It's a favor for Nick. Nick knows you're doing big money. He wants George to work in front of 7,000 people."
Oh, my God.
Okay, well, what the hell? So I told my talent. They all hated Nick so bad. I said, "Listen, guys, I want you to be nice to George." And every one of them went, "Oh, wait a minute. No, Ron." And I said, "No, it'd really be doing me a favor to do this, okay?"
Right.
So I had a guy in the crew named Don Carson. Don
Yeah.
Carson was a great personality. He was one of the best guys in the dressing room you could ever have in your territory. And I told Don, I went to Don personally because I knew his relationship with Nick, and I said, Don, I really want you to be nice to George. So the night George came, and he comes in the dressing room, and I watch. I sit there with my back turned, and I kind of paying attention to where he's going. And he went like most wrestlers around the dressing room, shaking hands and introducing himself. And when he got to Don, he said, "Oh, Don, good to see you. Good to see you." He goes, "How y'all doing?" And Don said, "We're eating, George." meaning, we're not starving like you guys are over there in Nashville. We're eating, George. And George just kind of put his head down and he went walking on. I was like, oh my goodness, Don. But George really was the demise of his father.
Yeah.
I
heard so, and I'll tell you how I know a little bit about the inside of that. My ex-wife was a lady wrestler for Nick Ulis. And in fact, I believe you knew her tag team partner, Ann Jeanette.
Right. Yeah.
I know for sure that you knew her ex-husband, David Novak from the Bounty Hunters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Novaks, yeah.
Yeah. Just as a little side note here, David Novak's son was my stepson for 16 years. So, and he looks just like him, Ron, if you ever see him. He looks just like him. So, now, I brought that up to ask you this. How important, even in the grand scheme of it all, how important was Gulis's presence there? Was he a catharsis for people to work off of? Was he somebody that you could legitimately get a start with and then move on from him? Or was he a complete waste?
Well, he had certain guys that
he served a purpose.
He had certain guys that he really liked. And my brother worked there a lot, and I never worked in the Nashville territory ever. My entire career, I worked Memphis for Jared for 1 year in 1975. But my brother liked Nick. He was one of the few guys that liked Nick, and he said Nick was always nice to me, Ron, and Nick took care of me. And I said, yeah, but how did he take care of the other boys, Rob? Well, I didn't ask what yet they made, he said, but but I knew Nick had certain guys that he really liked. Jackie Fargo, he's a huge Jackie Fargo fan. Lynn Rossi is an old timer back in the day. He was a huge Lynn Rossi fan. Lynn had a great body, and he used those guys. They worked specifically on Nick's side of the territory. They never worked the opposite side of the territory because they wouldn't have got used as good as they were getting used by Nick. But most of their guys that worked for Nick starved. I mean, they were really, really hungry. They had more Mexicans working that territory in the 30s and 40s and 50s. They had at one time 150 guys working that Tennessee territory.
Yeah,
and probably 50 of them were Mexican boys that they didn't pay anything to hardly. It was really terrible.
I mean, his reputation really precedes him. Mikey, I know you got a couple of questions, so I'm going to let you have this one, then I'm going to shoot it over to Dan.
I was thinking of Pensacola wrestling, and I remember from the corridors of my wrestling memories, the Rat Patrol of, I believe it was Tonga Kid, Brad Armstrong, or maybe it was Scott Armstrong, and Johnny Rich.
Yeah.
So I mean, talk about a babyface trio. But I was going to ask you, Ron, to me, the pro wrestling scene, as far as my own lifetime, would be 1983 is when everything peaked. That would be the greatest year for professional wrestling for everybody in the United States, at least, and probably in Japan too. And then when you had things like Vince McMahon sticking his claws into other people's promotions and the competition and everything that came with that, I think things actually declined before even the first WrestleMania. To me, 1983 with your area Continental, Mid-Atlantic, Georgia, Florida, World Class, AWA. That was the glory period for wrestling. As someone who kind of lived through the 80s wrestling scene from the inside, can you tell us from your own perspective, the vibe, the feel, as Vince McMahon Jr. was getting so competitive and so cutthroat with all the people that his father made those handshake agreements with, and those that same hand that shook those hands spawned this monster of a promoter who stabbed everybody in the back. Can you discuss some of that for us?
Oh yeah, and you're right. '83 was the biggest year Continental ever had. It was actually Southeastern still. We turned it into Continental in '85, but that was the biggest year. I worked in Japan in '83 with the Funks. Great tour with Baba and the Funks, Mil Mascaras and those. Wrestling was on fire back in probably the early 80s and specifically around 83. That's when we worked the angle I talked about with Bob Armstrong. The December of 82, 83 was a monster year for us. And and then when Vince, I was gone, honestly, guys. I left the business in 88. I retired in 88. After I finished with Continental and sold out, I started a company in Knoxville called USA Wrestling. I ran it for 6 months. I sold it to the same people that bought Continental from me. And I went into hockey. I don't know if y'all are aware of that.
Oh, yeah.
I went into hockey for 5 years. I was in the hockey business.
Interesting.
Vince obliterated the business. Vince killed wrestling.
Yeah, he did.
And because of greed. It was all because of greed. And you know what was really funny? In 1985, I had a company in Houston, Texas that was putting my television program, Continental, in the Middle East. We were in 5 different countries in the Middle East with my show. And they came to me and said, Ron, we've got a connection in New York. We want you to come to NBC and talk to them about a national show. And I went there. And I went to the NBC, talked to them. And when I left there, my thought was, if I do this, what's going to happen to me in this business? Am I going to be able to keep my friends in the NWA? And so when Vince got that opportunity, and what I would have done if I had taken that show is I would have put everybody's territory, their top guys, on that television. I would have made it the greatest wrestling product in the history of wrestling. If wrestling would have been today twice what it was in '83 instead of half of what it was in '83. What he did is he murdered it. He murdered it, and he did it for greed.
Ron, were you part of Greg and Vern Gagne's USA Pro group?
Yes.
When they started, okay, you were part of that when they see, for people who don't know what Ron and I are referring to, Greg Gagne and Vern Gagne got together with 3 or 4 other promoters and formed this super fed. It was called USA Pro Wrestling.
Pro Wrestling USA, to be exact.
Pro Wrestling USA. Thank you, Mikey. And it, on paper, it seemed like an amazing idea. But then something happened that always happens in wrestling, and Ron knows where I'm going with this. Promoters' egos go unchecked. They get out of control. Well, I want my guys to do this. No, I want my guys to do this. Blah, 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 blah. Before you know it, this super fed becomes super fed up. They all break away. They go on to their own little territories again, never to be seen from again, because Vince and his deep pockets and fat wallet buy everybody up. Now you've got one federation across America. Fast forward now, all these years later, you've got one wrestling group that really isn't wrestling, Ron, and I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tell you what I think, and you can tell me I'm full of shit. But I think that Vince McMahon doesn't like wrestling. I think Vince McMahon's father loved wrestling, but I don't think his son liked wrestling whatsoever.
Well, I tell you what, I don't think he knows wrestling. You know, I mean, I think
you're
his
not going to get
product
an argument from me, brother.
his product is so far removed from Southern wrestling that you can't recognize it. And you know, having grown up in the South and watched how it was done there, I can't watch his product. I haven't watched a WWE show in 20 years.
You're
I
not
don't watch
missing
wrestling
nothing.
anymore. I don't watch wrestling anymore.
Yeah.
I don't see any of it that I really could sink my teeth into anymore. But yeah, it was a real bad situation, and I love Senior. I love Vince Senior. I worked for him in the Garden. I worked for him in Philadelphia.
Right.
He was bringing us out of Florida back in the day in the '70s, early '70s, working Madison Square Garden and some of those major
Sure.
arenas. And you know, he's a good guy. His son doesn't really, and I believe you're probably right. I don't think he really likes the sport.
No, I don't
believe
think he does. I
He doesn't
really don't
respect
think
it,
he does.
That's for sure. He has no
Well,
respect.
you're at Ron. I'm going to tell you what, brother. You are spot on when you say he doesn't respect it. Every chance that man gets to shit on this product, he does. And how he's making money, I think is just because he's got a bunch of, you know, people that are so invested financially in his product that they're afraid to pull out. You know, it's like being with a real hot girl that you like. You know, you want to give her some, and once you're there,
man.
you don't want to pull out. But eventually, you're going to have to. Yeah, Dan, rescue me off of this.
Well, it's actually funny, Angelo, because
But I'm right though. You know what I mean?
You are, and I think it's important actually to take this moment. You talk about being with a pretty girl, and
Yes.
you know that kind of
Dan,
relationship.
let's have a word from our sponsors.
Anybody knows that you're going to be with a pretty girl, you got to be presentable, and in that case, then you can look for the tools of the trade from our sponsor, our friends at manscaped.com, for all your manscaping needs. For those out there who want to impress these pretty girls that Angelo's talking about, or maybe get involved and show off a little bit as we get into the warmer weather, you want that feeling of clean that our friends at manscaped.com with the Lawnmower 3.0 and the new promo pack they have, where it includes the Manscaped underwear and the wonderful freshness of your ball spray and Manscaped trimmers for
Yes, sir.
all your needs there. You can use the promo code WrestlingFuture for 20% off and free shipping on any of their promo packages. For that's manscaped.com and Wrestling with the Future.
And I'll tell you what, you know, we got just a guy tonight to help us promote this product. This will definitely put you in a Tennessee stud state of mind. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, boy. Well, you know, this is the first time. This is my first running into Manscaped, gentlemen. This is fairly new to me, and but it might be something I could utilize. You know, I'm not saying I.
Ron, I can get you a free starter kit.
Well, we might
They
talk
like
about that
us.
when the show's over.
They like it. Yes, sir. Well, I'll tell you what, you know, we know Ron Fuller is a wrestler, promoter, entrepreneur. You know, he's a manager. He's the head of this stud stable, all this stuff. But there's something else Ron Fuller is. He is now a published author. Now, I want to tell everybody it's not a wrestling book, but it's a damn good book. If you ever get a chance to read it, I want everybody to order this book. You can get it on Ron's website. It's available. It's called Brutus. Now, Ron, where did the story for Brutus come from? Let's talk a little bit about this without giving the book away, because I want people to buy it. But it's not, you and I spoke about it. It's really not a wrestling story.
Oh, no. No, it's got nothing to do with wrestling. And
Right.
It's a dream. It came from a dream. I had a dream one night. I dreamed all night about a lion. And I woke up the next day, and I got up and I said, I've never written anything, but I'm going to write a book about this dream. And so that's basically what I did. It's sat in the drawer for 20 years after I wrote it, and didn't do anything with it. And then a couple of years ago, I dug it out, and I got to really looking at what was there. And I went ahead and finished the book that I should have finished 20 years ago. And it's basically a story about a lion, an African man-eating lion that gets shipped mistakenly to a zoo in Knoxville, Tennessee, and that lion escapes into the Smoky Mountains National Park. And when that happens, all hell breaks loose, obviously. And I'm pretty proud of it. I spent 2 years writing it, and it was an experience for me, and I'm getting a lot of great reviews, and I hope people like it.
Really is. It's a great read. And I don't know if people really understand that. Here's what I liked about it, and I'll just tell you straight up. I love the simplicity of it. I love that it's a straightforward book. You don't have to go crazy trying to figure anything out. It's just, simple everyday language. You don't have to go nuts trying to. There are a lot of books that you can go crazy trying to figure out what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, this
book is, like I said, fairly straightforward. It's a simple read. It's a good read. It's a very easy read. The book is called Brutus. I want people to check this out. Again, it's available on ronfuller.com. I'm sure you can find it on the also available on the Tennessee Studcast. The links.
The TN Stud. You can get it on TN Stud. It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon.
Sure
out on Amazon. It's you can get it there. It's kind of a cross. This book's a little bit of a cross between Deliverance and Jaws.
Yeah.
It's got a little bit of that Deliverance in it, and it's got some Jaws in it, except they're not shark jaws.
Yeah, when I read the book, I thought to myself, this reminds me of my marriage. The lion got out of the zoo and prowled the Smoky Mountains, and there I met her. And then I got the hell out of Tennessee and went back to New Jersey. Thank you, God. No, actually, I met a lot of interesting characters. I met some really interesting characters in Knoxville. There was a guy I met there, Ron. He was called himself a promoter. A guy named Terry Landell. I don't know if you know this cat. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, man.
Oh, this guy is a character. First of all, just so people that are listening understand, no relation to the late Buddy Landell. I believe at some point he tried to pass himself off as a kayfabe brother, something along those lines. Ron, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I think he would like to tie himself into somebody that's legitimate, but he's a joke.
Yeah.
In that part of the country, he's a joke. He's one of those guys that wanted to be in the wrestling business and really believed he was in the wrestling business. And he just is. He's as bad as Vince, but in a different way. He just. I don't have many good things to say about Terry Landell.
Oh, I don't either. I believe his. I'm not going to call him out, but I believe that if you run across Terry, quote, Terry Landell, unquote, you'll never forget him. He's a, he's a real piece of shit. He's a scumbag. So let's just call him out. I'm not going to mince words about it. I'm a simple guy. He's a used car salesman. Take that for what it's worth.
Is that the guy that
I'll give you the last round of questions, brother.
Well, I think that's the same guy that Cornette pulled a gun on. Am I right?
Yeah.
Cornette ran him over.
Cornette's got a great story about Buddy Landell. It's a classic.
Yeah, he ran him over with his car.
Yeah, tried to run him over with his car. Yeah.
I think we gotta let the Tennessee stud get back to his girlfriend. I think she might need a little stud time from I understand still the Tennessee stud there, Ron. But what a pleasure. But I did want to make sure that we mention that not only do you have the book Brutus available, I saw on your website a collection of 5 DVDs that for the young wrestling fans that have never experienced Southeastern Wrestling, Fuller, and Golden versus the Armstrongs, all those exciting type of matches. I want you to consider purchasing those DVDs from Ron Fuller's website. And just so that people know that those type of classic wrestling matches, they're not the homogenized stuff you'll see on the WWE network where they extract all the offensive parts or they extract all the music. This is the real deal, folks. Yeah. So if you want to see wrestling the way it ought to be and the way it used to be, and hopefully that 12-year-old kid is out there listening to this show and plotting and pointing the return of real pro wrestling 20 years in the future, check out Ron Fuller's DVD collection.
Oh, appreciate that. Yeah, that's a TN Stud. That's my website. Got all kinds of things on there, and and I do a weekly podcast. I call it Studcast. Got a pretty darn good audience. Been on for 3 years. In fact, tomorrow I'm doing the 3rd year's episode, 156, and that's a whole story of my family. Starts with Roy, comes all the way through to my dad, and I'm in 1976, and I'm working my way. It'll be another 7 years before I get through Southeastern and Continental. But
I'll tell you, that's beautiful. So tomorrow you're celebrating 3 years on the air.
That's it. 3 years. 3 years of Studcast. And
tomorrow I'm celebrating 62 years.
Oh,
walking around this joint. Yeah, 62 tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I told you on the phone. I said you're my birthday present.
That's good. I'm glad I am.
Well, I'll tell you what. I would love to have you.
I do a Super Studcast too. I don't just do the one. I do a 3-hour once a month Super Studcast.
Yeah,
everybody. Terry Funk, Stan Hansen. I do an Andre, a Ron Wright, Bob Armstrong, the Assassin. It's just a Cornette. I mean, it's just a litany of guys that I know.
Oh my God!
And we just sit and talk for 3 hours and tell old stories, kind of like we've done here today. And it's
Ron, one of the things that we pride ourselves on this show, and I hope you've noticed that we don't talk an awful lot about wrestling. We talk about the human stories, about the people, and that's what we love to do here. We love talking about the people. You're a guy that I would love to have back. I would love to have you back and I know your schedule is like crazy. You got all this stuff going on. Because we planned this. How long ago did we plan this? Probably
6 weeks, at least 6 weeks.
I was going to say probably a month and like 2 months ago, maybe.
I think it was actually early. It was about 2.5 months.
If we ask Ron now, we might be good to go for like October.
Yeah, I'd be glad to come back, guys. I've enjoyed it. I like talking wrestling. It's what I've done all my life. Seems like so.
I'll tell you what, we like you here, man. We like you here.
So yeah, y'all go just get in touch with me, and let's do something in October.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Dan.
Yes.
Final round for Ron before we let him go.
Well, I mean, really, no. I guess the last thought I could get from you is a question I ask all our talent. And that's the question Eddie Graham used to say, everybody in wrestling has a first love and a true love. Who was your favorite opponent? Who did you love working with the most through your career?
Oh, man, I worked with so many people. Mongolian Stomper.
Archie. Oh, yeah, Archie Gold. Yeah.
Goldie. Wow. Really loved working with Stomper. He was kind of stiff. He was I just liked his style. And what a great guy, too, at the same time. I mean, and he worked for me for many years in my company. He was a bona fide badass. And he was one of those guys, when you brought him in your territory, he got over the first night. It didn't take very long. So, yeah, I really like working with Archie.
Aren't you happy that I'm old enough? I remember Archie Goldie.
I
remember Archie Goldie. No shit.
Yeah,
brother, I'll tell you what, I gotta have you back. Thank you so much for joining us. My best to your other half there. I won't call her out on the air, but I'll tell you what, she's amazing to get you on the Skype with us tonight. We almost didn't think this was going to happen, folks, but Ron's got a little secret weapon there. We're not gonna let the cat out of the bag.
Well, guys, I
Brother,
appreciate you on. I've enjoyed
thank
it.
you, my
very
friend.
much.
I'll touch base with you in a couple of days. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Take care,
buddy.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
The Tennessee stud, Ron. I'll tell you what, great guy. Great guy.
Mhm.
Dan, what do you think, kid? Everything you expected?
Oh, absolutely, and more. I mean, like I said, I got into the business as a wrestler, as a historian with my column, and those are the kind of stories that you look for. I mean,
Oh, my God.
that is an insight and it's unfortunate. We mentioned several big names that we've lost recently. That's the kind of stories you have to tell now, because you're not going to get to hear them 10 years from now.
And that's why we do what we do. And we keep telling people, we don't talk wrestling, we talk people.
exactly.
This is a wrestling show about people. The personalities. We're going to have, hopefully, we're going to have Dominic DeNucci. I would love to have Dominic on. We confirmed it, but then he's having second. We don't really know what's going on yet. But keep your fingers crossed, because we're trying to get Dominic DeNucci on. These guys, there's very few left. They're all leaving us,
Yeah.
I want that history preserved. Mikey, we got to preserve that history.
Well, the thing is, Angelo, the show is called Wrestling with the Future, and it's my belief, and this might sound like grandstanding or hyperbole, but it's my belief that the true pro wrestling fan base has got to come together and save the sport from the pretenders that are in the ring right now.
Exactly.
Dan has mentioned in his columns, I've mentioned in my pro wrestling rants, that the Kenny Omegas, the Velveteen Joeys that pollute and stink up our rings with their theatrics and their parody shtick, they are not living. They're not living in the footsteps of Tully Blanchard and Bret Hart and Buddy Rogers and Bruno Sammartino. So it's up to the fans that are more intelligent, more discerning. Fans like my friend in Texas, Jay Baca, who does his own wrestling podcast and is a big supporter of me on Twitter. It's up to us to reclaim the sport from the pretenders that are in this ring and are on our televisions.
Yeah.
And if we need guys like Ron Fuller to do a podcast so that 12-year-old kid in the suburbs or the city or wherever he's at, it doesn't have to be a Tony Khan Silver Spoon kid. Pro wrestling, by its nature, is a less expensive production to put on than a lot of things, because you basically need a ring and about 20 guys to do a good show in a venue.
Yeah.
So my hope is that this show not just preserves the past, but lays a foundation to salvage this sport for the future. That's my hope.
Well said, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that. I know it sounds campy, but in order to wrestle with the future, you have to embrace the past. And it's that mentality, and the more you reach the audience, and you see that with your Jim Cornettes and your Eric Bischoffs and a lot of these, excuse me, the stud cast and all these, the narrative of the past, because like Mikey said, I mean, a lot of people don't realize the financial peak of wrestling was pre-WrestleMania. And even in the era when, the Hulkamania era, and then the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars, when you were having, Raw drew an 8-point rating, like 8 million people. Well, congratulations. In the territory days, you had 30 million people watching wrestling at any given moment. Each promotion was pulling in 2, 3, 5 million people a week. Sure. So you figure how many territories there were, 30, 40, 50 million people every week watching wrestling. Here we are thinking 8 million. No, you have to.
Dan, they break 300,000 people and they're ready to celebrate. Okay, let's be honest about it.
Exactly. Well,
there's no millions involved anymore. We're talking about hundreds of thousands.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, they just had
Nobody's broken 1 million in months.
Right.
Literally months. They haven't broke the 1 million mark in 4 months.
Right. Okay? And they just released the numbers, NXT and AEW doing their competing pay-per-views with Fighter Fest and then the Great America, the Great American Bash.
Yeah.
And just yesterday, NXT won the final night with, I think it was like 751,000. 751,000 wins the rating war. You know, there was a point when a bad NWA cast, if they had 6 million, it was an off weekend. You know.
Yeah. I mean that's exactly what I'm talking about. You know, they're ready to celebrate.
Right.
With numbers like that. That's not a celebration. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah.
Well,
Mikey,
it's
jump
like
in here.
it's like Cornette says, the biggest marks are in the ring now. And when you got guys,
Before, Mike, I've said that before.
right? When you got guys like the New Day guy, the shortest one, who is he's in the dressing room watching Batista wrestle at WrestleMania, and he's flexing and posing to Batista's theme song. And you've got one of the guys is actually pretty good. Dax Harwood today is twittering about, he's with AEW now, and he's twittering about how he's watching both AEW and NXT, and as fans, we should be happy. This is a guy who's in the Revival who's telling us that he's watching the company that he just left because they wouldn't promote him, and they wanted to put him in a suspenders and a bow tie. And I tweeted back to him, I said, hey Dax, aren't you a wrestler, not a fan? And somebody responded to me.
No, they don't understand.
Right. Somebody responded to me.
Speaking of bringing people back, can somebody make sense of bringing back Heath Slater? Or am I missing something here?
That was
didn't they get rid of him for a reason?
He was part of the
like
budget
he can't
cuts.
wrestle, like he's got no personality, like he can't cut a promo, like he's really not that much to look at. Like,
he's not
why
much.
We got him back here.
No, he's not much physically.
I'll shut up now, Dan. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. Heath Slater's not much physically, but he is a talented performer. He's just one of those guys that's never really meant to get above the curtain jerker position.
Why did they bring him back? For what reason?
They did that as a favor to their champion. They obviously that was his goodbye, because it was they cut all these people during an outbreak, and not everybody got their moment in the sun. And he'd been with the company for years, and his best friend happens to be the current champion. So they did that as a favor to the champion. Now I think it's going to be interesting, because the second his non-compete clause is up, he's going to TNA, and at least that's the rumor anyway. And
why TNA?
His former tag partners there, and they've been hyping.
So he's going to go to a group that's barely existent at the moment.
Well, it's got to be better than being unemployed. I mean, I don't know.
Well, if you're going to have that mentality, go to AEW and make some money while you're doing it.
Well, AEW is they're not, they're got to be real careful not. Yeah, Mikey, go ahead.
Mikey's on mute.
You're muted. Okay, guess not. But AEW's they're not trying to sign every WWE guy, because that was WCW's problem, was they would sign these mid-carders and try and push them, and it just didn't work.
Yeah. Well, like I said, Dan, I don't understand the sense. Now, what are they going to do? They're going to bring him back again? You think they're done with him? Was a one-off deal?
Yeah, that was a one-off. That was his goodbye. Like I said, That was a favor to the champ, and that's it. Just
to give him some closure?
Yeah, he's been with the company for over 10 years.
14 years.
Yeah, you might as well give him something.
I'm going to take the opposite point of view, guys. I actually thought that was a good segment. I've been a low-key Heath Slater fan and a three-man band fan for a while.
I'm sorry, Mike. I was going to say, don't get me wrong. I agreed. I thought it was a good segment, but it doesn't change the fact that it was a one-off.
Well, let's put it this way: with wrestling, with WWE, with any wrestling company, these guys, in theory, are free agents. In theory, they can come and go as they please. We all know that that's not true in practice. Mm-hmm. But what I thought was kind of a waste was that they didn't get a better match out of it. They didn't get any meat off the bone. For instance, Randy Orton and Christian could have had some meat on the bone.
Well, let's not hold on, Mikey. I gotta stop you there. That's a whole nother dynamic. When you're talking about Heath Slater, understand something. He's there for Phil. He's only there for Phil. All right. They have no intention, at least in my estimation, from what I saw, they have absolutely no intention of using him for anything substantial. Like Danny said, this was a one-off. This was a final bow, a curtain call. This was his, doing the favor for a guy on the way out, whatever the case may be. But they let him go. And we need to understand something. They let him go for a reason. He just doesn't have it. Can he work? Yeah, he can work. He's okay for a preliminary guy. But he's not a main eventer. He's not even a middle carder. He's a curtain jerker. And that's all he's ever intended to be. The problem they made was trying to create this character for him that he's clearly not. He's a young, good-looking Southern guy, very Southern, very much, the accent, the attitude. He's this guy from the South, man.
And that's why Vince won't ever push him, because he is Southern. And
if they were smart, they could have used that to push him.
Yeah, but they're not smart.
Right.
I'll give you case in point. Time after time, we've seen it. Let's say Hillbilly Jim. Remember him?
Yeah.
Uncle Elmer. Remember him? Okay. I can go on. Look, Pretty Joe Floyd or whatever. What was his name, Dan? Pretty Joe Floyd, right?
Freddie Joe Floyd, Tracy's mother.
Freddie Joe Floyd. Yeah,
Freddie
there
Joe
you go.
Floyd.
There you go.
I guess
the point I'm trying to make is, I know Vince doesn't like Southern guys, but he's a smart businessman. He knows how to make money. Well, he used to. I'm going to clarify something, folks. He used to be a smart businessman, and he used to know how to make money. He's bleeding money out the pockets right now, okay? Dan, tell me if I'm in the ballpark here. I mean, they could do something with guys like that, but they choose not to. Why?
Yeah, outside of Texas, they don't push Southern talent, and that's a deep-seated problem. Now, you see in NXT, there are some Southern stars that have come up, but then again, NXT is the continuously the best program WWE has, and also the only one Vince McMahon has nothing to do with.
Yeah, and by the way, NXT is based in the South. Florida. You don't get any more southern than Florida.
It's even further
like
south
literally
than me.
the most southern place in America.
It's an hour and a half south of me. I guess my thought, guys, continues to be, everybody, myself included, we blame Vince McMahon Jr. for everything that's wrong with WWE creatively.
It's his company.
I guess my question. I hear you, but my question is: does the guy have early onset Alzheimer's? Does the guy have early onset?
I don't know if clinically he has onset Alzheimer's. I could tell you he's out of his fucking mind.
Well, I'm trying to give him the thought that maybe
glean from that what you will. Glean from that what you will. He looks like a deer in the headlights. Okay.
My point
he never
is,
did.
Does Vince McMahon, who is I don't know if he's in his mid-70s, late 70s, but
he's 75.
Okay, so the point is this: I'm not trying to pick on anyone who's a senior citizen at all, but we all get older and we all have problems with aging to different levels. And my feeling, it's no offense to Vince or anyone else who's older, it's that Vince is getting older and he's having problems with his mind. And that's as politely as I can say it.
To accept the reality of the situation, have a meeting with his family and say, I think maybe I should step down. What did I say before, Dan?
He's got too much pride, too much ego, pride. I think
Dan and I had this conversation. I don't know if you were on the show that night, Mike, but Dan and I had this conversation. All I would love for all he has to do to make me happy. It's as simple as this. All he has to do, walk away. Just walk away.
They did. Right. They did that as a storyline 5 or 6 years ago. Triple H came into the ring and told Vince that he was done and blah blah blah. So it's like 2 years ago in December of 18, the McMahon foursome came into the ring and told us that we were in charge. Remember that? And nothing changed. So
yeah, we're gonna listen to that. Not only did nothing change, but the product got worse.
Well, understand the difference between a work angle and a real angle. Okay? If you see it on television, trust me, folks, it's a work.
Right.
It's a work. They will never, ever tip their hat on when a camera is rolling. You'll never see it. You'll never hear it. Not on television. They'll never do business on TV.
That's why I say
just the way Vince works.
The shows like this are important because, we're not going to sit here. To me, what's great about Wrestling with the Future podcast is we're not analyzing every Monday Night Raw, digging at something, looking for something interesting to talk about. There's nothing interesting to talk about.
We'll never do it.
Right.
What the fans need to do is that some 12-year-old kid who loves pro wrestling has to go back to the old wrestling magazines he finds on Craigslist, or his uncle's got a stash of old wrestling magazines. He's got to dig through YouTube, watch the old Southeast Wrestling with the Fullers, watch the old World Class Wrestling with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, and hopefully what we're doing is providing a starting point for some young wrestling fan to build his or her own promotion that respects the integrity of what professional wrestling used to be and still should be and can be again. We can't watch the quote modern product quote of the last 10 or 15 years and think that is suitable for to sustain this sport. Like I've said, professional wrestling since about 2014 at the least. It's been like the steroid era of baseball. It's an era that's disgraceful. It's pathetic, and at least we're man enough to admit it and tell people about it. I'm not going to be like, say, a guy like JD from New York who screams and hollers about how bad the WWE show is, but he never tells you
shit. Please don't get me started with him.
He never tells his audience to stop watching. When I was doing the pro wrestling rants, I said, find something better to do with your time. Watch old wrestling. Watch alternative wrestling. Watch Japanese stuff if you have to.
He's got a problem. He's not that smart. Dan, go ahead.
No, I completely agree with Mikey. And, I mean, if we're going to have any kind of final thoughts, I think it's that it's unfortunate. Mikey brought it up a couple shows ago where there is a section of the wrestling audience that's waiting for Vince McMahon to die and see what happens there. I actually think really to get back to where we are, wrestling as a whole has to die. AEW and WWE, some of these companies are going to have to fold. I mean, even now.
That's exactly what has to happen, Dan.
Right. Even now.
There has to be, I'm sorry if people like me to say this or not, but there has to be a cleansing, a purging. There has to be a completely blank slate. Wrestling has to take a giant shit and then flush the toilet, and let's see what we got left.
Right.
Start with some fresh water. That's a start. The second thing you do is you get rid of JD from NY.
Well, I just mentioned him as an example, and look, my friend,
he's got nothing. Here's the problem with this guy. The problem with that, and I'm sure he's a nice guy off camera. Okay, here's the problem I have. I got two issues with him. Number one, he does the same thing every fucking day. Okay, hollers and hollers and hollers. That's the first problem I got. The second problem I have is there are idiots that are watching this guy's channel, shooting his numbers through the roof to watch him holler. Now, you might see that from me because I stopped smoking, okay? And as Dan has already noticed, I've been increasingly more vocal tonight since Mr. Fuller has left. Because I'm usually a very quiet, shy, unassuming guy.
Oh, yeah.
As I got my coffee and my cigarette.
Very quiet.
Yeah, unassuming.
Exactly. Right? And aren't I, Dan? Thank you.
Not in the slightest.
Give me a break, Jess. Give me a break, Jess.
Right.
But here's the thing, though. what bothers me is I call it the Cornette effect. Okay, people love Cornette. He doesn't say anything. He hollers. He rants and hollers. What is he saying? He's saying the same thing he said for the last 15, 20 years in a row. I hate this, and I hate that, and that needs to change, and this needs to change, and I can do it better, and blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? Go ahead. Put your fucking money where your mouth is, asshole.
Here's the thing I would say, Angelo. I think there's a certain escapism that we all have for pro wrestling, at least I do. It's a safety zone. It's a place to go where real life troubles or real life relationships with women are not involved, and we can put on our wrestling t-shirt and we can hide into the sanctity of our visions of wrestling past. And that's great. But when wrestling turns its back on you, when they start selling the shows to the Saudi Arabian government,
and
when they start
with that, Mikey.
Me too. And so when they start doing hypocritical things like saying they're promoting women's wrestling, but only if the Prince of Saudi Arabia allows for it, that's when I say, you know what? I'm not going to support this program as much as I used to. Like I said before, guys, probably 2007, I spent more money on WWE action figures than I should have. But 2020, I'm not spending much money on WWE at all.
Well, and yeah, I'm sure your bank account is grateful for that. You know, I mean, what is there to spend? There's nothing out there. There's no.
Well, you don't spend money on pay-per-views. Why would I want to buy a Drew McIntyre T-shirt? He's just another meat puppet for Vince McMahon. I mean, and here's the thing, also, guys, and this is kind of cutting it close to the bone. I do think that when you're a male, age 13 to 25, that's probably when your peak years of being a wrestling fan really should be. You know what I mean? Because we all get older, we do things with our own lives. But if I were a male 13 to 25 now, I don't know if I would watch pro wrestling, or at least WWE, because I don't know if I'd be impressed by what I was seeing.
No, you know why? You know, young males 13 to 25, they're on the internet watching porn.
Well, that's why
and they don't have to pay $9.95 a month for it either.
That's why they have a proliferation of Alexa Bliss, Liv Morgans, etc. Because
you know what, and they can have them. On that note, then we are going to say goodnight to everyone, but we have some amazing guests coming up.
Yes, sir.
So, what do we got coming up? We have, let's see. Of course, today was Ron Fuller. We've got next week. Oh my goodness, we got some good stuff coming up next week. We've got Andrew Anderson coming up, I believe, on Tuesday. Am I right?
The 14th, yes, sir.
So then we have on the 16th, I believe we have John Arezzi. Tell me if I'm...
John Arezzi's the 16th, yes.
Yep. John, we got Remembering the Territories on the 21st. Baby Doll comes back on the 23rd. And I believe we have on the 28th. I am looking for this one. This is the death and replacement of Paul McCartney with Mike Williams from the Stage of Play and the most controversial man in pro wrestling, Mr. Warmth himself, Vince Russo.
There you go.
Okay.
People,
you want to behave yourself that night, Dan, please. Please behave yourself that night.
Oh, I will. I'm actually off that broadcast.
I thought you wanted to. Oh, okay.
I would love the chance, but the 28th happens to fall on my birthday, so I'm going to use my birthday.
Right. Okay.
I'm going to enjoy my birthday to avoid being.
You.
Yeah, I don't. You know my opinion. I maybe I'm not the best co-host if you're going to have Vince Russo on the show.
Well, I'm sure Mikey will do an admirable job of taking your place that night, right?
Well, it'll be fun, and Vince Russo and I have a bond. I was on the Vince Russo show 2.5 years ago, which actually got my profile much higher in the wrestling community, and I dare say that because of the exposure from the Vince Russo show, that's how Angelo got to know who I was, and that's why we're all here together tonight. Yes. But I have to say, guys, that I've been listening to the audio version of the Memoirs of Billy Shears.
Yes.
And I've got the free Audible from Amazon trial. This book is a marathon. It's very intricate.
Yes, it is. Very much so.
It's at least 25 hours. It's a very complex book. And if people believe or they don't believe, you have to give credit to whoever wrote it, ghost wrote it. If Paul McCartney, who we know is Paul McCartney, if it's pure fiction, if it's partially fiction, this thing is intricate. This thing is well designed.
I will tell you that's where I'm torn, because you know how much I love that the Paul McCartney conspiracy, and I would have loved to have been part of that show, but obviously with my birthday I'm booked. But I do want to throw the following show on the 4th. I'll be hosting, and we're going to have Ray Savino, who's a friend of the shows, and a couple of the cast.
Yep.
We might have a call-in or two from the cast of Ghost Hunters on A&E, and we're going to do a show discussing paranormal investigations, which, if I'm correct, Angelo, is the first time in the show's history we're going to have back-to-back non-wrestling shows. So
absolutely, and we're going to be doing a lot more of them, and I would love to be on that episode.
It should be fun, and Mikey, I'm gonna go have you do your stuff. But for those out there, obviously, Wrestling with the Future, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter at Wrestling Future, no G. We also have the closed Facebook group, Wrestling with the Future Podcast. We're on YouTube, and I believe now you said, Angelo, we have an Instagram, Wrestling with the Future Instagram
at Wrestling with the Future.
And we continue to expand the brand. We're over 130 stations now on podcast, including 4 international. Yep. So we continue to expand the brand, and like Mikey said, we got to raise that profile, and we continue to do so.
Oh, so absolutely! Every day, every week,
look forward to the future.
Absolutely, and we also have a very, very special going on. 3 large T-shirts for $20. Look at the shirt. Check this out.
You're right.
This shirt. Look at that shirt.
It's a nice shirt.
Nice. That's a sweet looking shirt.
Hey, for everyone that's listening, you can buy those 3 shirts as a birthday gift to Angelo, because his birthday is July 10th, which was also the Great American Bash, Lex Luger versus Ric Flair in Baltimore, that a young Mike Messier attended as an infant. And Barry Windham versus Dusty Rhodes. So Angelo, did you watch that pay-per-view on your birthday back in 1988 when you were 5 or 6 years old?
When I was 5 or 6 years old? God bless you. No, I watched it live. I was there.
Well, I was in the attendance for that too, so we were both at the same place at the same time, buddy.
Yeah, but I was behind the curtain when you were out in the audience.
That's true.
You probably paid to get in. I didn't have to.
Oh, gee whiz.
Angela snuck in the back.
Well, you'll have to tell that story. You'll have to tell that story on a future episode, because I'm doing a series of Great American Bash memories that started with the Sting Flair one. But as we get to the midnight hour tonight, it is the anniversary of Flair and Luger. And then the July 23rd is the anniversary of Flair versus Funk, 89 Bash.
Well, we can discuss it at that time. But right now, we got to say goodnight to everybody, because we're already pushing 2 hours and 10 minutes. So, everyone, thank you for Mike the Movie Maker, marvelous Mike the Movie Maker Messier, MikeMessier.com. If his name was a website, it would be MikeMessier.com. For Dan the Man Sebastiano, the smartest guy in the room, the happy haberdasher. I am Psychic Medium Angelo. Enjoy. Happy wrestling, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.